Perfect. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming in.
Hello.
Hi, Eugene.
Hi.
Hang in there. We have a wonderful speaker, Craig, here with us today. And, we'll give everyone else a couple more minutes to come in and we'll dive right into it.
Sure, I'm looking forward to it. Thanks for the invitation.
Of course, Eugene. So if you're just joining, we host webinars on a monthly basis with teachers and educators who are utilizing technologies like VR or any other kind of immersive technology. So to be in the loop for those, please do follow us on our social media. And here's a couple of links that, QR codes that you can scan in and give us a follow. Just to give everyone a heads up as well, the session is being recorded. If you would like to, have a link to the recorded session to share with your colleagues, do let us know and we'll be happy to send that to you. Okay, welcome everyone. If you're just joining in the session, just to give you a heads up, we'll be starting. We'll be starting in a bit, and the session is being recorded. So, if you would want to share this with your colleagues, do let us know, and we'll send you the recording. Just making sure I'm meeting everyone. Welcome to all those who have just joined in. We'll be starting the session in a minute. Okay, I'll continue admitting people along the way, but we'll get started. So welcome everyone, a very good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining in. my name is Adila. I am a co-founder at VERE360. I also teach ICT, and I am very, very passionate about education and using technology. And if you're here with me today, I bet you are too. We have a fantastic speaker for you today, Craig, who's going to share more about his journey as a teacher using virtual reality. But before that, I'd love to share a little bit more about VERE360. So VERE360 is a virtual reality education platform for K-12. We host monthly webinars with educators who are utilizing VR and immersive technologies in their classroom. So if you'd love to stay in touch, get notified of the different get notified of the different webinars that are happening, do give us a follow in these links. Let me just go and check that I've admitted everyone who's here. Okay, one more person. And okay, so this is us, VERE360, and I would love to give all of you a very warm welcome. Just to give you a heads up, we are
used to clean up white face. That's disgusting. Your hair will never get washed properly. My hair does.
and button is speaking to us.
That's great. A slice of American cheese is just this much. No, the tongue is over here. Yes, it is. Okay, in Japan, it is widely believed that
Mute yourself. There's a bit of background noise coming around.
What is your
Okay, thank you so much for pressing the mute button. So we are very, very grateful to have Craig Frehlich with us here today. I've probably gotten in touch with him last year, and every time I have a conversation with him, he's so inspiring. I learn something new from him every time. I'll give you a more in-depth introduction of him. So Craig Frehlich has been teaching science and design thinking for over 28 years now, and has his master's degree in curriculum and instruction. His book, Immersive Learning, a practical guide to virtual reality superpowers in education, has won the hearts and minds of many progressive educators around the world. Craig is passionate about using VR to leverage and engage students. His popular podcast, VR in Education, has hosted over 58 guests to talk about how VR is transforming the way we think of pedagogy and learning. And I'm very, very honored to have him here today. And let's see, I have a little bit of chat over here. Yeah, so thank you so much for coming in. For those who just joined in, we're getting started. And before we dive into Craig's talk, I'd love to give you a little bit of introduction of VERE360. So moving forward, this is the agenda for the webinar today. So, for the first 20 minutes, I'll give you a little bit of introduction of VERE360, how you can bring us into your classrooms. And after that, we'll move on to learning more from Craig about his VR journey in his classrooms. And after that, we'll open up the session for Q&A. So let's dive right into it. So VERE360 was created with the simple mission of democratizing experiential learning. So around the world, we know that lab experiments are difficult for many students to do in their classrooms or in their schools because they do not have access to labs or do not have access to high-end labs. Field trips on the other end is also something that's quite expensive, and many schools do not have that. So our mission was pretty simple. We wanted to, give students access to these, in a way that's teacher friendly. So we didn't want to come in and just give them another, tech tool that they had to learn, but we wanted to provide them with a simple tool that they could utilize immediately to provide more experiential learning in the classes. So because of COVID as well, I mean, at one point we had 90% of students out of school, and we realized that this kind of experiential learning components are really out of reach for them. But the problem with experiential learning, as you know, educators, you would know that existed even before COVID-19. So like I mentioned, laboratories are very expensive. They require investment in infrastructure. In Singapore, we know that even a basic lab
Got any ideas on that one?
even a basic lab requires around
It doesn't have to be
investment of
written, eh?
$40,000
Oh
just
well,
to
okay.
create.
Probably
And then,
has to be
you know,
written, but like
there's yearly
find
up.
a way to.
Just to give everyone a reminder, if you're not speaking at the moment, do press the mute button. You know, and we'll get into Q&A afterwards where you can speak. As well, you know, you would know as school administrators as well, most of you, that you know field trips are also expensive, and you know mostly it's very, very time intensive for teachers to plan, execute, and actually follow through and ensure that there are lab equipment are always taken care of, field trips are being planned. In general, we just realized experiential learning, the way it's done today, is not scalable. And if I could give you an anecdote from my schooling experience, I went to a local school in Singapore where we'll be learning all this fantastic science content for like 2 to 3 months before we will even get to try it out in a lab, because that's how competitive it was to get a space in the lab for your students. So we wanted to make it super simple to provide experiential learning to your classes. And so we brought experiential learning online in a way that's affordable, scalable, and teacher friendly. So it was really, really important to us that our platform is teacher friendly, because we wanted to complement what teachers are currently doing. So teachers can use our platform in 3 simple steps. Once they go into their workspace, all they do is they upload their lecture slides or worksheets or notes, any kind of PDFs that you have used in your classroom for years now. And then there are libraries of immersive content. So there's 3D models, 360 videos, photosphere rooms, and an ability for you to add quizzes. So you can actually incorporate content from these library in between the pages of your worksheet or notes, or your in between the slides of your lecture. And after that, you just share a class code with your student, and you're able to run the class and give your students really that hands-on experience that they were lacking while they were just listening to you in the classroom, or just doing certain doing like test prep or worksheets. So for the platform itself, even though we as a company have built content that are very high end, that require VR headsets, because the goal of this platform is really to democratize experiential learning. And we are using VR technology, but we actually took out the requirement to use the VR headsets. So schools that do not want to invest in VR headsets, they can actually just utilize this platform on their students' phones or tablets. So I'll stop sharing for a bit, and I'll give you a little look into what a class may look like on the platform, and hopefully you'll get a better understanding of what I'm talking about. So today I'll be sharing with you a class that was built for secondary school sciences. So it was actually built for the digestive system topic, and I'll show you how like a case study of how a teacher might use this platform. So if you can see my screen right now, this is how the workspace for the teacher looks like. So essentially, once you go in, there are very few functions. We try to keep it as simple as possible. So once you go in, you just upload your lecture slides. And this whole thing, the lecture slides is the backbone of this class, and this is something that most teachers use to teach. So after you upload these slides, slide 1 to slide 5 over here are actually the teacher's existing materials. So once I come to slide 5 over here, I realized that there's a way for me to add on a more immersive component. So this slide has an image of a stomach, but what if using this platform, I'm able to actually give students a hands-on experience as much as possible into what a stomach may look like. So you're actually able to go into this 3D model library here. You can type in and search for whatever you're looking for, and a couple of options will pop up, and then you can insert them, as part of your slides over here. So after you do that, let that load for a bit. Here it is. So this is a 3D model of a stomach that you're able to incorporate. And like I mentioned, you just share a class code with your students, and after they key in this class code on their phone app, they're actually able to get the hands-on experience. They'll be able to interact with it. And, we thought that was something that was lacking from general classes. I'll give you a little bit more look. There's a couple of things happening here, but there's a small and large intestine that this teacher was also able to find a 3D model for and give their students a hands-on experience of how something like this might look like. We also had teachers who wanted to give their students, especially older students, a visual of what more realistic organs may look like. So we actually have models in the library of like scans of organs. A couple of them, one of them is loading right now. And in general, we would love to provide this library so that teachers are able to, in a way, just drag and drop whatever they want, just complement their existing materials. The second last thing I would like to talk to you about is that a lot of times as teachers, we want to get very quick feedback. So if you want to, oops, it's not loading right now, but here. So if you want to, get very quick feedback from your students and, understand, if they're being engaged, of their learning, or if you're clear in the concepts you're delivering, you actually have the ability to add quizzes. And once you add this quiz and your student answers, you're actually able to see, what students answer which option, and you'll be able to see if your students are engaged in the classroom. The last thing I would like to show you is, of course, we're talking about VR here. So there is the immersive 360 content, but we also have, gamified content where students are actually able to go into virtual spaces and interact with them. So a lot of content in VR, a lot of times rely on the gaze function. So if you see the white dot here, it's the gaze function. It's where your eyeballs are looking. So using that, the students here, this is just a playthrough of the game. But the student here is able to interact with different components and actually do a lab experiment without actually having to be in the lab. So this library here for the 360 3D models and photosphere rooms, which are 360 photographs, there's lots of curricular specific components for you to utilize. And we're always happy to customize content for you as well. So I'm going to stop sharing right now. And, we'll love to dive into Craig's journey as well. So let me just stop sharing the platform. And yeah, if you're interested to learn more, do give us, I'll be sharing our oh, there's some people coming in. Yes, so okay, I'll be sharing our contact details with you as well, and we'll get you set up with accounts so that you can try it out in your classroom with all your colleagues and your students as well. And now I'll love to pass it over to Craig, and there's so much to learn from him. And thank you so much for joining us today, Craig. All yours now. I think I'll have to make you the host. Give me a sec.
That was a wonderful introduction, some of which sort of was my journey that I'll talk about here in the next 20 minutes. So I'll pull up my slides. It's not letting me pull up my desktop, I don't think.
Craig, would you want me to share for you?
Sure, that might make it simpler. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Okay, let me just do that.
As she pulls this up, just a quick note. You can probably see the tear drop from my eye because I've been in Singapore here as an expat for over 5 years. And I was telling her that we're heading home back to Canada. And just last week back in Canada, it was a frigid minus 30 degrees Celsius. So I'm going to miss Singapore weather.
Quick, can you see the screen now?
I can, perfect.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you. All yours.
Perfect. This is just a quick preview of, why VR for me and what makes me maybe someone that might be able to share with you my journey about virtual reality as it pertains to education. So I've recently published a book called Immersive Learning. I also host a podcast that has over 58 now episodes of various industry experts and people who are change makers when it comes to virtual reality and education. And then most importantly, I've been using VR in my classroom, not for 25 years, but for the last 5 years. As a science teacher and a design teacher, I've found it to be a valuable tool, almost like a sidekick, like Batman and Robin, so to speak. Next slide, please. There we go. Whoop. So a quick story to tie in VR. As I alluded to, we have lived in Singapore for quite some time now, 5 years, and have had some lovely travels. And one travel story in particular that has stuck with me and applied as a metaphor for learning is we went to Borneo in 2006, and my family was just young at that time. It was my wife and 2 kids. And we were lucky enough to hire a guide to hike through the rainforest. And the guide was hiking us through this path, and I was slightly scared because he stopped us and said, just wait here. And I'm really scared of snakes. Thankfully, I haven't seen too many in Singapore, but I thought for sure it was a snake. But it wasn't. It was a monkey that was stuck up in the tree. And this particular species of monkey was being tagged by the officials, the wildlife officials in the Borneo area, just so they can keep track of their numbers. And how they tagged this particular monkey was that they put food inside a jar like you see in the picture, and the monkey would crimp its little hand in and they would grab the food, kind of like the banana that you see in the picture. But then the monkey wouldn't let go. So you could get close to the monkey and it would scream, but it didn't have the thinking skills. It was too sort of innate in it to let go of the food. So you could go right up to the monkey, they put a collar or a tag on it. And this is an interesting metaphor for maybe schools. Having taught in Singapore, not in the public system, but in the international system, but in Canada as well, there was a time where schools were so solely focused on facts and memorizing. And we were realizing that we weren't teaching kids deep thinking skills, like how to adapt. The concept of adaptation is so essential in various subjects, whether it's biology or even chemistry, history, and so on. And so that led me to how I looked at VR. Next slide, please. I did some work for over a year for a virtual reality company called Springboard VR, and my job with them was to look at existing content that was on Springboard's platform and find best use case scenarios on how they might align to educational curriculum. Many of these weren't thought of as educational apps at first. So for example, some of them people sort of said, well, isn't that's a game. That's not there's no educational application. But thanks to generous time and money by Springboard, I was able to go in and see the efficacy inside these VR apps that led me to my journey to write my book. Next slide, please. So as I said before, I think schools are starting to wrap their head around that it's just as important to teach concepts as it is to teach facts. So things like How do we make sure kids truly understand the concept of power or changing identity, or in the sciences, systems, or what happens and why in regards to change and conflict and sustainability, which Singapore is really good at. And then, of course, rights and responsibilities. So conceptual understanding is becoming a big part and emphasis of many curricula around the world. Next slide, please. And it's my belief that VR can be used to help teach kids not necessarily just facts, but more importantly, the bigger conceptual ideas. One of the grandfathers of virtual reality, and I highly recommend this book, Jaron Lanier wrote a book called The Dawn of the New Everything. And in the book, in one of his chapters, he basically says that here's where VR is really good. It's amazing at turning something really complex into something lucid or more understandable. Next slide, please. You know, and as more and more studies come out, like the one you see on the left, where there's a study that basically was then put into this newspaper that says recall information when you use VR is much higher. And it was these studies that sort of set the groundwork to say, well, great, but can VR not do more than just that? Again, that's why I titled my book, The Superpowers of VR, because yeah, sure, absolutely. VR can be good at helping kids memorize things, but there's something more to it. There's two words that you'll see thrown around with VR. One is presence, and the other is called embodiment. So a higher end VR headset, when you put it on, things like the Oculus Quest or something like the HTC Vive, where you have full degree movement of your head up and down instead of just on a stick. We call this 6DoF or 6 degrees of freedom. So your hands are also involved. That realism makes the learning sticky and more memorable, and your brain tends to crave the experiential methodology that goes along with forcing a kid to use their hands and to move around using teleporting. Next slide, please. So many of us might be familiar with Bloom's taxonomy, and we know that in Bloom's taxonomy, we work our way up from getting kids just first to recall facts, but then more importantly, it gets harder. How do we get kids to truly understand things and then to apply and analyze? And it's my belief and my experience over the last 4, maybe 5 years with VR and research done with my book that VR can get really good at higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy. Next slide, please. You know, here's a great example. Stanford in San Francisco, Stanford University, which is a real hub for virtual reality and education, came up with an amazing application called Becoming Homeless, a Human Experience. And in this VR app, you put yourself in the shoes of a homeless person. The very first step is you're sitting in a house or an apartment and you have to use the VR controllers to try and sell some of your stuff because you've become bankrupt and you've lost your job and you have to get rid of assets. Pretty soon, as you start to make choices, you realize that, you know, as much as you try and sell your stuff, that's not going to stave off the rent bill, and they kick you out of the house. So then you're plopped inside a car and you literally can look left and right inside your car, and you're living there, and there's garbage and there's junk in the floor of your car because that's been your home for the last little while. And then from your peripheral vision in this app, you start to see police sirens, and a policeman comes up to your car, he knocks on the window, and it's so visceral and so real. And they basically say, you can't live in your car on the street. And then you're plopped on a subway or an MRT, and you have a bag, and that's all you have now. You're sort of left with these belongings within your bag, and someone on the MRT walks close to your bag and tries to take it from you, and you have to grab it from them. So this whole visceral, empathetic experience teaches people higher level thinking about what it's like the plight of homeless people, because I think we sometimes think that a homeless person, it's their fault and everything that's gone wrong in their life is a result of their inability, to follow sort of the golden path of life. And this VR experience really viscerally teaches kids that it's not just always that simple and easy. Next slide, please. So learning experiences like this, which I outline in my book, might be called CRISP. CRISP stands for, if you're going to use VR, make sure you anchor it to some concept. For example, becoming homeless, we might connect the idea of identity and someone's changing identity to that learning experience. R stands for real, which means connect it to a real world connection. I says, let's use VR experiences so that kids can interrogate what's going on, challenge beliefs. S stands for make sure it's still connected to your curriculum and standards. And then P means make sure you plan for it. So planning means before kids go into a VR headset, what is it we want to unpack for them and scaffold? What are some questions we might consider, or maybe a YouTube clip we might show them? In other words, what are some of the important underlying facts? And then once they're in the headset, we probably only want them to be in there for 15 to 20 minutes, but what should they be looking for and paying attention to? And then the other thing that you want to plan for if you're going to use VR, especially higher end VR, is once they're out of that experience, because for some kids it's so realistic and visceral, we want to unpack and reflect with them and debrief with them with questions about, so what went on? What did you learn? How does it connect to the concept we were studying? Next slide, please. Besides that, besides connecting these unbelievably visceral, embodied experiences to help kids sort of learn bigger concepts, which are harder to teach. It's easier to teach facts. We can probably get them to memorize facts. Drill and practice can teach facts, but the concepts, those are harder to teach. And I think putting a headset on with VR can really help that. But beyond that, VR has been shown in research to also do an amazing job of soft skills. So the soft skills curriculum, has to do with things like social skills, their self-management, things like how do they learn about learning. Next slide, please. So I know it's hard to remember, but I remember flying back from a flight from Dubai, and I landed in Singapore, and I was waiting, getting a Starbucks coffee, and I saw two pilots who flew for Emirates. And I decided to engage in a conversation with these two pilots as we're waiting in line to get a Starbucks coffee. And I asked the two pilots, because I said, which one of you is captain and which is co-captain? And they sort of looked at each other awkwardly and says, well, I'm captain. And the other gentleman said, I'm co-captain. And I said, well, I know in an airplane, there's two sides. Who decides who does what in the airplane? And both of them said it's actually built-in redundancy so that they both have sort of the same thing. I said, so then how do you decide then who does what at what particular time? And this is where it got interesting. And, if you Google search communication between pilots, you'll see that there have been lots of mishaps and, missed landings because they weren't good at communicating between each other about who does what. And it led me to believe that whole concept of two-way communication is so essential, not only just for pilots, but for everyone in life. Next slide, please. So one VR application that I use quite prevalently to try and teach this notion of good communication skills, and I do it in we call them advisor classes. You might call them homeroom or home form or pastoral care classes. It's called Keep Talking and No One Explodes. And you put on a VR headset and you have in front of you this really fictional cartoon-like, bomb. Pardon the term. If this is offensive to you, I don't mean to sort of offend you in regards to using something like this as a learning tool. It is part of kid culture in that they're gamers. So anyway, you see this fictional bomb and it has all these things on it like dials and wires. The person outside the VR headset has a manual and you have to talk to each other on how to diffuse the fictional bomb. You know, you might say to the person outside of your VR headset, you know, I see 6 wires, you know, some of them are colored. And the person with the manual say, okay, I see on my manual, if you have 6 wires and one of the 6 wires is red, then cut the 3rd wire. And my students over the last 3 years have played this and just love it. And we get lots of kids coming from China at my school, and you know, you see them start to really work at communicating and speaking in English because it's motivating to them. It's fun and challenging. Next slide, please. You know, another amazing social skills collaboration activity that I used to play back in Canada, which was Kick the Can. And in the game Kick the Can, someone had to be in charge of manning or protecting the can while everyone else sort of ran off and hid in the bushes. And then what happened was you try and sneak up as teams to try and sort of not get tagged, but kick over the can. And if you did get tagged or noticed, then you sort of sat on the sidelines. And this game really taught you to work with your partner to try and sort of trick the person into allowing you to kick the can. Next slide, please. Well, there's a VR version of this. It's kind of a modern day kick the can, and it's called Akron. So with Akron, you're a giant tree. If you put the VR headset on, you literally have tree limbs. And everyone else outside of VR has a phone app. So they can play on their phone as a little squirrel, and they have to steal the acorns from the school. But what makes this educational has to do with you get the kids to work in teams of 2 or 3, and they have to come up with a strategy ahead of time. So we talk about it first, you know, and they can pick a different kind of squirrel. There's like big burly squirrels that might act as sort of blocking. There's other kinds of squirrels who are fast and can run. So they come up with this strategy on paper, and then they have to enter the game and emulate that strategy to try and steal the acorns from the giant tree. Again, incredibly popular. It's almost like we've tricked kids into learning collaboration skills and teamwork through VR. Next slide, please.
Craig, do you want me to play the video? Or
No, we'll just go right on to the next one.
okay, sure.
So how do we leverage VR? Archimedes had this saying. He said, give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum on which to place it. And Archimedes said, I can move the world. But if you know anything about physics and science, this isn't quite true. Where you place that fulcrum is essential to making sure that the lever is doing the work that you need to do as a teacher. You know, we might call that return on an investment. Do you want to use VR to up your engagement within your classroom or improve achievement, especially on concepts, or, you know, up usage rates when it comes to kids embarking on hands-on experiences? Then you need to shift the lever to the right. If you move the fulcrum, if you move the fulcrum more towards the right, then we get something called mechanical advantage in physics. And the lever is easy to push down, and the learning and the experiences that you provide for kids can be amazing. And VR offers its best return on investment when we start to consider to use it for these types, soft skills or understanding big ideas and concepts. So this has been sort of my first sort of foray into why VR has been an essential tool for me within the classroom. Next slide, please. Recently, I've also transitioned to actually teaching with an avatar classes in VR. So this is one of my first classes. It's called Design and Engineering for Empathy. And so you can see in the background, that's a digital virtual room. So we've basically created a virtual classroom. So kids come to this class from all over the world, and I teach them design and engineering. We have a number of different digital classrooms, so we can move from maybe that amphitheater that you see back there that is very traditional to, you know, an industrial arts setting if we need to. We can, you know, I don't teach the science part of this, but you could take kids into a science lab. And this has been an amazing experience for me, is to teach with my VR headset on with a digital avatar for kids. Next slide, please. And then my final journey that's also to be continued is, now that I have this deeper understanding of VR and I've experienced hundreds of VR apps thanks to Springboard VR, I now am curious to how is it that I can create my own content and then teach kids how to create that content. Next slide, please. You know, it's funny how childhood has changed so much these days. I had fond memories as a child playing in the sandbox. And to me, playing in the sandbox meant doing almost whatever my imagination cooked up for me. I might have a shovel, but it was up to me to think about what I might make within the sandbox. But I see play nowadays, maybe not so much in Singapore, but certainly back in my home country in Canada, so structured. You know, you think of even some of the play apparatuses that you see on the right, you know, we kind of squelch their imagination because that big plastic play structure that you see on the right forces kids in a certain path. You know, we almost might say that it discourages or converges their thinking. Whereas a sandbox promotes what we might call in education divergent thinking, which is we're encouraging them to come up with wild ideas. We're encouraging them to envision as they're creating things within that open sandbox what to do, as opposed to funneling them through play down a slide. Next slide, please. So, you know, here it is. I think, again, when you start to read different progressive educators, they're saying that we need to do more of the divergent thinking and get them to, that's how they get to ask questions and be curious, as opposed to if we force them to think convergently, which means we give them facts, but then we say, okay, yeah, here's the right answer based on those facts. Next slide, please. So VR, again, might be an amazing tool to help kids to use what we call divergent thinking. And this journey can be done gently, almost like the ladder you see. We could get them in existing VR applications to Sandbox, which means just to play around. They already have the objects in there and they can manipulate them. Then get them to move into what we might call 3D design, which means let them play with, you know, toruses and spheres and rectangles to start to create maybe a world of their own. And then finally, to create the whole environment, which means the world with the assets, as well as then the interactivity that we know will help them fully unpack a learning experience. Next slide, please. So there are already lots of off-the-shelf VR experiences that have what's called sandbox mode. So sandbox modes mean do what you want. Gadgeteer is a really amazing one where they get, if you're familiar with Rube Goldberg machines, they get dominoes and pipes and marbles and catapults, and they get to just envision some crazy contraption, or you could give them more of a structured activity within there. Another great one, believe it or not, I don't know if you're familiar with Angry Birds the movie, but there's Angry Birds in VR, but it has a sandbox mode. So you can build your own Angry Bird towers, and then you can get other students to grab a slingshot and try and knock over those towers. And then as a design teacher, I use another thing called VRK Shop. It's a workshop, but for VR. So they have virtual saws, they have virtual pieces of wood, and they have to cut and learn to use tools, which again, I get lots of kids coming to my design classes and they've never ever picked up a hammer before. Next slide, please. Then you can start to move into creating 3D assets. Again, it's not something you have to design. Tilt Brush can allow kids to start to paint in 3D. This girl that you see there is creating a volcano. I've seen lots of people in the fashion industry create like virtual dresses, or you could use Sculptor VR and start to sculpt your own VR creations or allow your kids to do that. Again, the learning curve on these is very slim to none. And then finally, next slide, please. You could get to world building. Again, these are social VR platforms, but they can also allow students, password protected rooms, of course, to build their own room. Altspace, another great one. They could build their own world. And it's simply just grabbing a tree and plopping it in, or grabbing some already pre-built asset and plopping it in. Kind of like SketchUp, if you're familiar with Google SketchUp. Last slide, please. And this is the journey I'm at now. So all the things you've saw so far, I've sort of progressed through, and I feel like I'm competent at teaching kids. Now I'm at sort of the level that it gets complex, and that is learning to create interactivity within a VR experience. So I've just finished taking a couple courses on a basic, simple coding program called A-Frame, which then will allow me to teach students how to code animation and interactivity. So I could teach them how to make their own science lab and get them to code and program how to grab a beaker and pour out liquid. Now, this isn't for the faint of heart. This does take a bit of time. I get many questions from educators. How do I get my kids doing that right away? That's exactly what we need in our school. And it does take time and understanding, or you could outsource it. I know lots of polytechnics already are teaching their university students these skills, and maybe that's something that you outsource. I've really enjoyed this journey of learning this part now. Ultimately, if you see on the right, I'd like to get to learning a really robust program called Unity. And in Unity, that's where things get really complicated, you know, making lots of choices and loops. And if they do this, make sure that the entity or asset then does this. And so I'm loving my journey, and I'm fortunate and lucky that I was able to share it with you along the way as to where I'm at in regards to using VR in schools and in my classroom. Thank you guys for listening. I'd love to open it up if you have any questions that you think I might be able to answer.
Thank you so much, Craig. Thank you so much for sharing all of those. We're very honored to have you here and, listen to your experiences in the field. So like Craig mentioned, we are open for any Q&A right now. So feel free to unmute yourself, or if you wish, you can also type in the chat and I'll read it out. Or perhaps unshare, and then, you can put the focus on Craig or whoever is talking. Oh. So we have a comment. Thanks for the really engaging and informative talk.
You're welcome. Thanks for saying so.
Craig, maybe I'll get the the Q&A started. So I think, I'm very curious about how, there are so many teachers out there who would love to, start creating and get into, creating more content for their students. But I think there's always this initial, I would say there's always this like initial lag because, we have so many things on our plate, right? And there's also lesson learning goals that you always have to meet. So I wonder, what's your strategy in terms of finding in a little bit of, extra time to actually learn and also incorporate it into the busy class schedules?
I started with just 2 VR headsets, and I put them as a station in the back of my classroom. And I would often, send kids back there. They had a goal that they had to do within it. It depends what we were doing, of course. Like I used to teach math, and there's a VR app called Cubism. And Cubism is all these little shapes, and you have to use systems thinking to grab the 3D shape and twist it, and make a general overall shape. So it's all these sort of puzzle pieces, but they're in 3D, making it so neat. The kids loved just sort of trying to figure out how to twist it and orientate it and the different permutations. And that's great for geometry, but it's also, and this is where I think we need to change the paradigm. That activity is great for all sorts of thinking, not just, well, gee, does that really fit into my biology class? I would argue, we're so, I think sometimes fixated on this linear story. But if you think of it, if you've ever watched a movie, some of the good movies take us out of the linear narrative, and it might be a backstory. So I call these little learning engagements backstories where, problem solving is applicable to most of the sciences, if not applicable for anything. So why not give a kid a chance to take a break, maybe from their INS note taking, go back to the back of the room and work on, a problem solving thing, especially if problem solving is needed for the INS thing that they're studying, or send them back to the becoming homeless experience, back of the room. You go back and try that because you may be doing a unit on rights and responsibilities. So that's how I've used VR initially, was using it as a station, sending kids to kind of a little station within my classroom.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing that, Craig. We have a couple of questions coming up in the chat. So the first question is, how did you introduce VR in your school?
Persistence. Right now, the amazing VR headsets, which, if I had to recommend one right off the start, it might be the Oculus Quest 2. It's only $399 US. You can get it on Amazon. It's 6 degrees of freedom, which means that kids can move their hands and they get sort of movement of the head. And to convince, I remember when my son, who's now in university, had to get a TI-82 calculator. And at that time, he had to get it for math. And it was $200 and some. So I said to my principal at the time, surely you can find, $300 and some for me, and I'll prove to you over the course of the year that it's going to excite and engage students in learning. And it grew from there. I just started gathering qualitative and quantitative data, which was easy to do. The kids within that school started talking, and I, sent them to the principal, and they would say that the VR is amazing. And it grew to the point where that school now has, back in Canada, they have a VR lab with over 20 headsets. So.
Wow. Okay, thank you so much for sharing that. I think that's awesome. The next question I have for you is, thanks for sharing. What is your pitch to parents or admin who might be skeptical about about adopting VR in the classroom?
Yeah, one of the things that comes up in some of the work that I do with schools and consulting is that parents and some traditionalists will say, well, my kids already spend so much time on the computer. I don't want them spending more time. And they don't see these as learning activities. They see them, unfortunately, as games. And so the pitch becomes trying to show the efficacy of what we're doing as learning engagements. So getting them to switch the thought process and twist the narrative that, these aren't really games. These kids are using all sorts of parts of their brain to think about things that are now part of the curriculum.
Thank you for sharing that, Craig. I think Eugene, would you want to comment?
Hi, thanks, Adela. Sorry, Craig, I just wanted to politely barge in, only because I think I'm speaking on behalf of a few other principals as well. And I totally agree with you, Craig. I think it's, if you can convince your school, or anyone for that matter, that it is going to enhance the learning and it's not just a game, Now that first I want to say there's nothing wrong with a game. Let's not bastardize the word fun and game to think that it's going to diminish learning. It shouldn't. But I think from a principal's point of view, I think with any technology and not just VR, and hopefully Attila and Craig and everyone else in the room will agree, is I think for anyone, the danger is when it is just seen as the shiniest at the moment, and then there's no sustainability. So one of the things that I'm very precious about in every school that I worked in, and I'm sure Craig, you probably experienced lots of success because that's exactly what you've done is when you take it to a sustainable level, so that in the design, in the implementation, in the expansion, in the application of the program, it becomes approach towards sustainability. So you are building an entire ecosystem around it, and not just that it's going to be only in science, because those will be the direct and the most direct connections. But then when VR permeates into literacy and literacy and social development of children, emotional development of children, then I think as any administrator or parent that initially may have concern, and those concerns can be quite real, it's when they are truly convinced that it has got applications beyond just a one dog pony show, then I think you're going to increasingly get a buy-in. And then it becomes justifiable that to spend $400 on a device, and then you want to spend $400 on more devices. But those it's a little bit like a chicken and egg situation, I think. Yeah. Do you agree, Craig?
I do totally. I've never actually used the term sustainability, and I love it. You know, in design, I teach a concept on sustainability, and I couldn't help but think of triple bottom line. So, you know, what's the social impact? What's the economic benefit? And then, of course, in sustainability, it's usually environmental, but for us, that might be what's the learning impact. So I love that term, which I'm going to steal from you, Eugene, and use.
Thank you, Eugene and Craig. I have a couple more questions for you, Craig. So the next question is, could you share what are some of the issues that you encounter at the start of your VR teaching?
Yeah, some have already been brought up before, and you know, Eugene painted a really good picture. One is accessibility. You know, I think in today's day and age, it's important to try and make sure that all kids have access. So, you know, on a microscopic level, that meant that I had to make sure that when I just had one headset or two headsets, that all kids within my classes were getting enough or equal time. So that was a big issue, is accessibility. Another big issue, which is still brought up lots, is how is this connecting to my standards and curriculum? And that should be thought out ahead of time, but that's easy. If you take enough time or tap into enough people, there is great connection and great efficacy that this, as Eugene said, once thought of as a shiny little tool, no longer. You know, enterprise, if you look at how it's being used now in enterprise, there's immense use case. The healthcare industry is using it. You know, dentists are using it. Lots of companies are using it, like American Airlines and different airlines, because, you know, you can put people into one plane, but only a few. But let's say you use VR. So you're teaching your stewardess what, you know, what's the procedure if we do have to evacuate the plane. You can recreate that and scale it in VR, and you don't have to buy a whole bunch of planes and put them on the tarmac. Mind you, there's a lot of planes on the tarmac right now, I guess. So those are some answers to that.
Okay, thank you so much. We have another question, or mostly, asking you to share about maybe a couple of softwares or programs that you've used to incorporate your CRISP method into the teaching.
Yeah, two of my favorite, just because they're applicable to more than just one subject, would be the Keep Talking and No One Explodes, because it's all about communication skills. So we have a big ESL department and they use it. I use it a lot in some of my science classes, or design classes. Design thinking is about empathy and being empathetic towards your client first. So how do you do that? You have to conduct primary research, which involves interviews. So before we do that, where they learn how to do a good interview, we might play that game and talk about two-way communication. So to unpack that, you want to have a good lesson plan that basically says, here's why we're doing it. Here are the questions we're going to hone in on before we do this activity. Here are some things you need to do, while you're in doing the activity, and here are some post-activity questions. If you encapsulate it that way, and then the other thing I talked about in regards to CRISP is I'll often show them a video clip of a crisis hotline, like a suicide hotline. Some places around the world, people who man the phones for suicide hotlines have no training whatsoever. So I show them that YouTube clip and the kids are a bit aghast and they lean in and they talk about, well, that's not right. That person has so much accountability. If they have someone on the other end who's thinking about committing suicide, shouldn't they be trained in effective two-way communication? So those are some things to think about. A real world connection, are we planning it before, during, and after? Are we connecting it to a big idea or a big concept? So keep talking and no one explodes is a good one.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that, Craig. Our next question for you is, how do you get other teachers at your school to access different VR content for different subjects? Are there specific platforms you use for different areas?
Right now, it's a bit of the kind of, if I can use a cowboy term, the wild, wild west. What that means is right now, a lot of educational providers are looking for a dedicated platform to have their VR apps hosted. Most will use either, if they're lucky, because it's hard to get them published, Oculus, the Oculus website, so oculus.com. Another platform which has a huge reputation as a gaming platform, it's not really an educational platform, is Steam. So many VR apps are right now sitting or housed on Steam. And other than that, there's Viveport, again, more of a gaming platform. So there's a real need to have someone step up to the plate and start to act as a curator of educational VR apps, along with building a community around this, as well as starting to maybe help sort of funnel lesson plans in there to allow us to use them.
Okay. Thank you so much for sharing that, Craig. Just to give everyone, perhaps if you joined slightly later, like my 2 cents about that as well. For VERE360, we try to do something of a similar integration process. So we try to incorporate multiple levels of VR content onto a platform for different subjects so that teachers can utilize them. But because our focus is so much on democratizing, we try to ensure that in a way there's like multitude of content. So there's gamified content that you would need like a VR headset, or there's like simple 3D models that you could use on your phones. So essentially, we do have lots of content available for you to try out for different subjects as well. And I'm happy to take this on with you separately too. So Craig, I do have a couple more questions for you. The next one would be, would there be a difference for students using the VR headsets versus their mobile phones with VR apps? So I guess this is the mobile VR versus your headset debate.
Yeah, there's an immense difference. And, if you have the chance to listen to one of my podcasts, the very first question I ask all my listeners is, what got you interested and involved in VR? In other words, I always want to know, when I interview someone for my podcast, what's your origin story? And about 85% of them say, the reason I decided to get into VR was when I first put on a higher end 6 degree of freedom headset like the Oculus Quest or the HTC Vive. And the reason they say that, and I invite, if any of you who are listening haven't tried a higher end headset yet, you need to try it. Again, the two words that are often used in literature, in studies, is presence and then embodiment. Your brain can barely tell the difference between what's real and not real when you put that headset on. Like, and there are great stories about the proverbial walk the plank. So walk the plank means, like, in VR you could go up to like a high degree of height and then try and walk across a fake platform and look down, and your brain literally thinks that you are several stories up, and many people would have a hard time jumping off that virtual plank because your brain is so hardwired to think that this is real. And therefore, because of it, the learning experience, if it's active, is so real. Think about, why do we love to travel so much? We love to travel because it's the experience provides something memorable to us. Well, VR does that. It provides kids with this visceral experience that becomes memorable. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, thank you so much, Craig. I have like one last question on the chat, but if anyone wants to, jump right in and ask a question, please feel free to do so now. Okay, I guess I'll take the last question on the chat. So here it is. Okay, thanks for the presentation, Craig. Would love to ask about a common problem with the VR headsets when students feel giddy. When teachers try out the headsets for the first time and they feel nauseous, they're less inclined to take up the solution. How have you tackled this problem? Thanks in advance. Very, very common problem out there.
Yeah, and that happened actually earlier on. I don't see it as much now. So in 2018, when VR was becoming popular, we weren't quite yet sure about what frame rate that our eyes saw was sort of optimal for these experiences. So that was one thing that was causing so much nausea. Another thing that was causing a lot of nauseous experience had to do with how the app was designed. You really shouldn't have the user in first person perspective be moving in a jittery fashion, like stopping and starting too much, and so too many people would experience VR for their first time in a roller coaster. I don't recommend that. In fact, unless you have a good stomach, roller coasters in VR aren't really a good idea. And that's, the entertainment industry marketed VR as this is going to be convincing everyone how amazing VR is. And what it did was it turned a lot of people off VR because it made a large number of people sick. And so VR experiences, especially for the first time users, should be fairly passive. Passive means that you're not moving sort of too much within the environment or setting. A great one for that is something called The Blue by Weaver. The Blue is an ocean experience, and you have this giant whale come down sort of in front of you very slowly, and you get to reach out, and it feels like it's so sort of right there in the visceral experience. And so I agree with you that that can happen, but my quick answer to that is not lately. The technology has come a long way, and the headsets now are adjusted that VR motion sickness is slim to none.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, Craig. So that's all the questions I got on the chat. Would anyone like to unmute themselves and ask something? It's a great opportunity, I think, to learn from Craig here as well and implement things in your classroom.
I'm just excited to see so many teachers who are interested. I think Singapore, I've always loved Singapore as being so progressive, and their tech industry kind of drives what goes on in other parts of culture and society. So I'm excited. Sadly, I'm going back to Canada and we'll probably freeze to death, but I'm excited to keep my eye on Singapore, especially the Singapore education system as it starts to adopt some of these emerging technologies.
Craig, I hope everything goes well in Canada. You know, I hope you're safe over there. I'm actually got a last minute question for you, which is thank you for the very informative discussion and the encouraging posture for VR's educational value. Oh, this is a nice comment actually. Excessive. Also, you know, there was a note that says excessive exposure is not always good. Is there anything you would like to comment on that as well?
Yeah, I mean, 10 to 20 minutes inside a VR headset, right? VR isn't meant to be used for all educational curriculum objectives. One would hope that, you know, it's not VR school, you know, it's a VR experience. So whoever said that is spot on, or very poignant in what they say. We don't want kids spending 6 hours in a headset each day. Yep.
Absolutely. And you know, if I could add on something as well, uh, I think it's very important to see where VR actually comes in what way it will help the learning goals as well. You know, I think in general, teachers already have so many wonderful techniques that we have used in the classroom for so many years, you know, in so many years of their career. I think it's really about embracing this new technology and understanding how it will bring your student engagement further and how it will actually complement whatever you have going on in the classrooms. So would anyone like to add anything else? If not, I know we're running a little late. I have one more chat coming in. Also, someone actually commented, I think it's a teacher. So they mentioned that, you know, thank you very much for coming to share. Unfortunately, we are still having lessons and CCAs in schools, but definitely inspired to get a higher end VR set and explore further. I think this is a total win here, you know, it's a total win for adoption. And you know, we hope that, you know, keeps going. I'd love to, you know, end the conversation here. I know we're running a little late and wrap up everything. So again, for those of you who joined a little later, so my name is Adila. I co-founded VERE360 with the goal of democratizing experiential learning using virtual reality technology. We hold monthly webinars as well. So if you'd like to stay in touch and stay updated on the next, the next webinars coming up, please do follow us using these QR codes here. We also do have a free platform where you know, I'm happy to set you up. So do get in touch using these or you know, our email address that you can see. Let's see, right at the end, I think. I'll get you set up with the apps as well, so you can see our email address here. Do get in touch if you'd like to get you know, test accounts. I know most of you signed up using the sign up link, so you know, if you have indicated that you wanted some of the accounts, I would you know, I would set that up for you as well. So I think those are really the last few things from me. Craig, I'm very, very grateful for you know, to you for coming down and sharing your wisdom with us. It's been very inspiring. So thank you so much. If anyone would like to stay on and ask anything, please feel free to do so.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you're ever in Canada when things open up.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, we had someone just join in. Sorry, Aditya, did you get the timing wrong? I'm happy to chat with you as well if you're staying or book another session with you.
Sorry, I was in another meeting and it just extended for an hour. So
no worries. You know what? I'll just flash our email address. So if you want to get back in touch, we can set up another session to talk more about it.
Okay, is this we are still continuing or is it over?
We just ended actually.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. Nice to see everybody. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, thank you for coming, Aditya.
Okay. So I'll close it now. Is it okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I'm going to head off. I have a meeting also, an after school meeting.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming down, Craig.
Okay.
You know, I hope everything goes well for you, and hopefully I'll catch you in Canada one day.
Yes, that would be great.
Okay.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. Okay, so
Bye.
everyone, I'll just stop the webinar now. Bye-bye.